Washington Journal continues.
Back with Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut, serves on the Intelligence Committee. Let's begin with the intelligence that was unveiled to reporters yesterday about the downing of Malaysian airline Flight 17. Front page of the Wall Street Journal says U.S. intelligence officials with reporters laid out the case against Russia. What do you know as a member of the Intelligence Committee?
Well, at this point, Greta, there's very little doubt that this attack was undertaken by Eastern Ukrainian separatists, and there's very little doubt, although, if this were tried in court, you'd want a little more evidence than we have, because, of course, the separatists and the Russians have dragged their heels on letting the international community into the site where you might find missile parts and that sort of thing. But look, even that said, there's very little doubt that this was done by the Eastern Ukrainian separatists, that this is not something, you look at these guys, this is not something they pulled off on their own. At a minimum, they got training and assistance, and so one way or another, Russia's hand is very much involved in this tragedy.
Where's the evidence?
Well, as the bodies are examined and as the wreckage is examined, even from a distance, we can look at, for example, the side panels of the aircraft and see that there was shrapnel that helped bring down the aircraft, very consistent with the use of an SA-11 missile. And as you get closer and more opportunity to, as I said, look for missile parts, to look for other forensic evidence on the site, what happened will be pretty clear. And look, there's enough sort of eyes and antennas in the region picking up who's talking to whom, optically looking at what actually happened, that again, I can't get too into the details, but there's not a lot of doubt about what actually happened there.
How many briefings have you had?
Well, remember, we went out of session sort of just as this, at the end of last week, just as this happened. So there was the staff of the Intelligence Committee has been kept constantly up to date, the leadership, and we have been provided with, when we all came back yesterday, we've been provided with the latest on what our intelligence community thinks. And again, that's why I say what I do, that there's just not a lot of doubt about what happened.
Then what should be done? What should be the next step from the United States if this is the case, if the evidence points to Russia's involvement?
Well, the key thing here is, the President of the United States, it was just 2 days before this tragedy that the President announced new sanctions by the United States, and that's good and that's important. And the real linchpin here, though, is will Europe go along? Europe trades a lot with Russia. Europe gets about 30% of their energy from Russia, so they're doing exactly what they've been doing all along, which is making a lot of noise, but being very careful that they don't ultimately damage their relationship with Russia. And by the way, what happened here is appalling, and Putin needs to be called out for it. But we also need to remember here that we are engaged with the Russians in some terribly important things that are absolutely essential to our national security. And of course, at the top of that list is the ongoing negotiations with Iran on making sure that they don't ever get a nuclear weapon. So yes, we want to push the Russians hard. We want to call Putin to the carpet, but we don't want to so scotch that relationship that our ability to work with Russia in making sure Iran never gets a nuclear weapon is compromised.
Do you have concerns that the president appears weak?
Well, of course, it's now become a cottage industry in this town. You can pretty much assume exactly what any Republican in Washington is going to say, because it will be the opposite of the president or critical of the president, which is sort of sad, because in foreign affairs, I'm old enough to remember a time when we had tough fights about, taxes and spending and domestic issues, but it used to be that partisanship ended at the water's edge. This time, of course, the president's critics are saying it's all his fault, which is absurd, right? I mean, the notion that, the situation in Ukraine, or even our ability to dramatically influence what's happening in places like Syria, is somehow the president's fault. The president, I think, if you look at his time in office, can be criticized for specific things, but this. You notice the president's critics when they say he's looking weak, and then the journalist says, well, what would you do? And, people like Senator Graham come up with pearls like, well, he needs, the president needs to call Putin a thug. Well, okay, that's not exactly advanced foreign policy.
The headline in the New York Times this morning, Putin pledges to help but sees limits on his role, telling the Russian people that the other countries have asked Russia to have influence over these separatists. He says that he will try to exert that, but sees his role as limited.
Baloney. Look, he controls the separatists, right? He arms them, he trains them. Without Russia, without Putin, the separatists are a bunch of drunks with 1950s guns. And so, that statement is just crazy. And, he's put himself in a box now, right? I think domestically in Russia, the taking of Crimea, and the ongoing sort of fomenting of rebellion in eastern Ukraine, it served him very well domestically. Russians are feeling strong. They have a strong leader, but supposedly strong leader. The long-run game for Putin is not a good one. Guess what? Europe is smart enough to figure out that they can't continue to get 30% of their energy from Russia. That's already changing. So Putin, maybe in the short run, has very high domestic approval ratings, but he's leading his country into even worse economic straits than they're in today.
How do you get inside Russia, into the Russian people, when we hear these news reports from Russia TV that making these claims that the United States is really responsible for MH17 and all of these other reports that seem erroneous?
Well, look, all you can do is tell the real story. People will always be subject to the propaganda of their own government. It happens, in Gaza, it happens in Syria, it happens all around the world. Eventually, the truth prevails. We'll do our best to make sure that what is really happening in Ukraine and what happened. But Putin is he was a spy for a long time. He understands how to do propaganda, and, he's going to continue doing it.
Yesterday, several airliners, U.S. airliners, canceled flights into Tel Aviv. FAA followed up later saying, we will not allow U.S. airliners to go there for 24 hours. What intelligence did they have that there was a threat? Do you think that was a wise decision by the government?
Well, it was certainly a prudent decision by the government, and it's not, you don't need to be an intelligence genius to know why there's concern. I mean, Israel, is not a lot bigger than the state of Connecticut, which I represent, right? It's a tiny place, and you've got Hamas in Gaza launching rockets, several an hour, all of which have the range easily to hit Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. So again, it's not like Hamas has the kind of missile that brought down the Malaysian airliner over Ukraine, but they are constantly launching missiles, and that, of course, poses a very real threat to aviation in and around Israel. So I think the decision, as long as missiles are in a position to reach those aircraft or to reach the airport, is probably a prudent one, which brings us, of course, to the need to bring that conflict to an end.
We have more issues to talk about with you because you wear several different hats in Congress, but let me get to some phone calls first. Todd in Robinson, Illinois, independent caller. Hey, Todd, you are on the air.
Hey, good morning, y'all. Congressman, I just want to know how you can be so absolutely certain that Russia did this. I'm not saying that they didn't. All I'm saying is there has been no investigation whatsoever. The black boxes haven't even gone to the Malaysians yet. And here we are, we're doing exactly what we did with Iraq. We're doing exactly what we did with Syria. When it turns we let the investigation happen. Before we start pointing fingers, before we get into another war, let the investigation happen.
Yeah, well, Todd, look, it's a point. A lot of people remember the was supposedly watertight case for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and so your instinct, I think, is the right one. Before we do anything dramatic, let's make sure the case is locked. And you're right about that. But look, nobody's talking about going to war. The idea that we're going to do what George W. Bush did and send troops into the Ukraine, as he did in Iraq, it just isn't happening. And you're right. At the end of the day, and I think I mentioned this when I was talking about it, if we had to prove what happened in a court of law, we'd probably need a little bit more evidence. But look, the bringing down of an airliner is not something that happens quietly, for obvious reasons. I'm not in a position to discuss all of the evidence and intelligence that's out there. But at this point, we're pretty close to the point where I think a case that the separatists did this would hold up in court. But the important point, I think, of what you said is, and this is why it's so frustrating, that doesn't mean there's a button that we can push where all of a sudden the situation is changed or better, because we're not doing what we did in Iraq, which was rely on a case in order to go to war. That's just not on the table.
You said the U.S. will not be sending troops. There is this story in the front page of the Washington Times that the U.S. is going to help the Ukrainian military. The Defense Department saying that a group of representatives who specialize in strategy and policy will head to Kiev to evaluate specific programs that the U.S. may want to help bolster.
Yeah, which is a very different thing than what we did in Iraq, putting hundreds of thousands of people on the ground to fight a war. Look, the long-term answer, and I think everybody recognizes this, is for, first of all, Putin to stop supporting these guys in eastern Ukraine, and for some arrangement, some peaceful arrangement to be made between eastern and Ukraine and Kiev. I think the theory here is, you'll recall 2 months ago, the Ukrainian military was just a disaster. They were everywhere, failing, abandoning their posts. They have since been much more aggressive and much more competent. We're going to create the kind of stalemate that leads to negotiations. And by the way, I think Putin will jump at those at that kind of a stalemate now, given what he's brought upon himself. We're going to need to make sure the Ukrainian military is in a position to defend their own country.
Well, what about Bob in Michigan, Republican caller? Hi, Bob.
Hello there.
Morning. Go ahead.
Okay, I got a few things here I've got written down. I'd like this guy to try to attempt to defend. Like Benghazi, dumping illegals, lying about illegal deportations, the NSA, the AP, James Rosen, Fast and Furious, Bo Bergdahl, the IRS, the VA, the ATF, Russian reset, Syria, healthcare, Keystone, EPA, climate unchanged, government shutdown. The president shut the government down, not Ted Cruz. Eric Holder. We have a Marine in jail in Mexico, and this guy's flying around at fundraisers. Henry Louis Gates. Voter suppression, that's all on your side, not on ours, sir. Van Jones, communist. He appointed czars.
Okay, so Bob, what's the point? In
the
a
point
comment
is,
or a
this
question?
guy, any other president would have been laughed out of office by now if he'd have been a Republican. This guy gets away with murder.
Okay, Congressman?
That was quite a list. I will try to attempt to defend. Actually, I'm not going to. Look, with all due respect, Bob, maybe a little more C-SPAN and a little bit less Fox News. That was the grab bag of everything that Fox News and my friends on the Republican caucus and of the House in particular have tried to hang around this president. Now, you listed about 20 things there that would take the rest of this show to go through it. But look, let's start with your first one, Benghazi. Benghazi was a real tragedy. It absolutely was. 4 Americans killed. I sit on the Intelligence Committee. I've had the opportunity to interview in detail pretty much every person who was on the ground in Benghazi. And guess what? The kinds of things that Bob was suggesting, and we heard every conspiracy theory, every wacky out there. They were dealing drugs out of Benghazi, that they were handing shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles to people in Benghazi, that the president was helping al-Qaeda in Benghazi. All of it is utter baloney. And again, that comes from somebody who spent a lot of time talking to the people who were on the ground. It was a tragedy. The State Department did not have the kind of security that they needed there, that should have been there. Now, Bob frames that in a very partisan way. It's the president's fault. Well, guess who supplies the money that allows the State Department to provide security? It's the Congress of the United States, which is, in the Senate, a Democratic Congress, and the House, a Republican. So those are attack points against the president, most of which, in some cases, have some reasonable basis in reality. Benghazi was a tragedy. None of the conspiracy theories were true. What happened at the IRS was appalling. The fact that emails got lost was nothing short of appalling, and a massive failure at that agency. But the point is, Bob's line of thinking is this is all about the president. There's been absolutely zero evidence that the president had any hand in any one of these particular so-called scandals that the Republicans have desperately been trying to promote. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because, you know what, the economy is actually doing an awful lot better than when this president took office. 9 million jobs created. The Affordable Care Act it's sort of interesting. Bob didn't mention the Affordable Care Act, and that's because they're not talking about the Affordable Care Act all that much because, there's millions of Americans who are benefiting from it today. So anyway, we can't go through the whole list. This president has had his weaknesses and his mistakes, but the idea that he's sort of out of the White House manufacturing conspiracy after conspiracy is just a figment of Fox News' imagination.
Let's go to our line for Democrats. Jack, Providence, Rhode Island.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
All right. Representative Himes over there was a very rude dismissal of that gentleman who happens to be a Republican from Michigan. I really didn't like it. It was kind of arrogant. Okay. I'm a Reagan Democrat. I didn't agree with Ronald Reagan on domestic policy, but I agreed with him on foreign policy completely, the way he handled the old Soviet Union. Now, the IRS, first of all, I know we're getting off subject here. That is not just errors. There is definite criminal culpability there, particularly by Miss Lerner, who's nothing but scum, okay? Secondly, Barack Obama is not qualified for the job to be president. He doesn't have any real management experience, and he's overmatched by Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is a highly intelligent, trained KGB officer. Okay? Now, how's that for intelligence, Mr. Himes?
Well, I disagree with the conclusion. Putin may, in the very short term, be popular with his people, but he's driven his own economy into the ground, and you're critical of the president. And as I said, there's reasons to be critical of the president, but in the 5 years that he's been president, the recession has turned around into 9 or 10 million jobs created in the private sector, stock market at record highs, businesses more confident. Putin has taken his country in exactly the opposite direction, where the Russian economy is on its knees, and he may have a temporary burst of popularity in Russia because he took the Crimea. But in the meantime, the Europeans are saying, guess what? We're going to get our energy somewhere else. We're not going to, 10 years from now, be importing most of our natural gas from Russia. You know what Russia has to offer Europe? Natural gas. That's it. You don't see a lot of Russian, high technology, biotechnology, Russian entertainment, Russian education. Putin, I think he may have high popularity ratings in Russia today. In the long run, he's absolutely disastrous for his country. And look, with respect to the president, again, like any president, he's done some things right, he's done some things wrong. But in the face of some of the worst economic times any modern president has faced since the Depression in the 90s, this guy has helped turn that around. In the meantime, he passed legislation which reins in some of the irresponsible behavior on Wall Street. He passed a universal health care law, which of course is quite controversial still, but which is providing benefits to millions of Americans. He's taken steps to reverse the discrimination against gay people in this country. I mean, the list goes on. And when that list actually looks pretty good, by the way, he killed Osama bin Laden, right? I mean, the list goes on and on. So the opponents, and I certainly didn't mean to be rude to Bob, but he ran through the tick list of these things that they're trying to hang on this president, some of which are rooted in reality. As I said, the IRS thing and Lois Lerner, that was appalling, absolutely appalling. It's important also to recognize some of the progress that this president has made.
Dana on Twitter says, when you get away with blaming everything on your predecessor, you can do whatever you want. And Victor says, whoever said Putin was a chess player never saw MH17 coming, and the toll his incursion into the Ukraine is costing Russia. Let me go to William in Marion, Indiana, independent caller. Hi, William.
Yes, Representative Hines. Jim, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I am a member of the nation, but I have been successful in about 3 state economies, and I would like to know why President Obama has not sent in the intelligence into Ukraine already through the forced retirement of captains in the warriors in the battles of the ISIS campaigns, and why is the Commonwealth not used in the AKA as preceded by the judicial judgment 18 months ago? And I would just like to say that I am a strict Democrat because of a forced strict economy in the state of Indiana.
Okay, and William, you got to call in on the Democrats' line then. Congressman, were you following that?
Not really. It sort of sounded like William was asking why we don't have more people on the ground in Ukraine. Again, as you pointed out, Greta, we are providing some assistance to the Ukrainian government. I think it's very much in our interest to help this country. And remember, this is where this all got started, right? It all got started as Ukraine was trying to figure out, are we going to go more the Russian way and participate in whatever Russian, free trade area, not that that really means much, or are we going with the European Union and, trading with them and sort of adopting their political approach? That's the answer, right, of course. And by the way, that's where they're going. We need them to kind of integrate into Europe and not go the way of this, what is rapidly becoming a rogue nation led by a guy who is making, again, people are saying he's strong. There is no strength in violating international law and fomenting terrorist activities in countries next door. Eventually, that comes back to bite you.
Let's hear from Sam next in Manassas, Virginia. Democratic caller. Hi, Sam.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning to representatives. It's interesting we're a nation of justice and freedom, but yet the Representatives House continue to support Israel in the destruction of the Palestinian place. Look, this is a nation. The Palestinians are people with the right to exist, coexistence with the Israelis. Let's don't forget, after the Second World War, when the Jews came to America, nobody told them they could create a Jewish land in the United States. Why are you supporting Israel to pass a law that makes Israel a land of the Jewish people?
So, okay, well, Sam, let's get the congressman's take on the Israeli-Palestinian situation.
Sure. And Sam is concerned about my support for Israel. I do support Israel. Israel is a remarkable story, and it is the one democracy in a terribly chaotic land. They are our allies, and they're in a heck of a tough spot right now in a brutal conflict with a terrorist organization. Now, the interest here, of course, is to make sure that just as in Ukraine, that conflict is reduced to a point where negotiations can resume. It sounded like Sam was kind of going in the direction of trying to, point fingers, establish blame, and you can spend a lot of time doing that. You need to revert to the fact that there's been an awful lot of loss of life in the region, and it's tragic, particularly the innocent life. But Israel has abided by the ceasefires that the Egyptians, amongst others, have called for. They have been attacked. Their civilian centers have been deliberately attacked by Hamas, which puts their missile launchers and puts their activists in schools and mosques so that when Israel goes after them, there is civilian death. The right thing to do here, of course, is to step back and say what is happening is a tragedy. Let's pull back and get back to negotiations around a way to live together in the long term.
Should Israel agree to some economic relief for Gaza?
Look, we should always be open to humanitarian relief for people who are suffering. And there are a lot of people who are suffering in Gaza, a lot of innocent civilians who are suffering. We also need to make very sure that if that happens, this is not relief that falls into the hands of Hamas for use with their militants or that gets sold on the black market so that they can buy guns. Hamas is their behavior with respect to how they have treated their own civilians, using them as human shields, is appalling. And so, of course, anytime you have a civilian population that is in dire straits, as many Palestinians, innocent Palestinians are, you want to look for ways to alleviate their pain.
Dee, in Okeechobee, Florida, Republican. I don't think I said that right at all, Dee. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's Okeechobee.
Okay.
Hey, I just want to tell Mr. Himes, first off, you have a really great set of talking points, Why don't you just speak from the heart instead of Obama's talking points? I mean, you guys, you liberals, got these points, man, down so pat you can practically do them in your sleep, okay? And you need to stop that crap. As far as Russia is concerned, now, my personal opinion is Obama, okay? He has been after Russian President Mr. Putin ever since he kind of disobeyed Obama when he wanted to get Snowden back. That's when he started going after Russia, no matter whether he had the facts or not. The minute something happens, it's all Mr. Putin's fault, okay?
All right, let's get a response, Dee, from the congressman.
Well, I don't quite know what Dee means by the president was going after Russia. I'm not quite sure what she means by that. Putin for, Ukraine is not the first time. And remember, let's be very clear what happened here. Putin went into a neighboring country and took part of it, the Crimea. It was illegal. The president didn't go after him for that. He criticized him for that. He imposed sanctions for that. But Putin did something that was blatantly illegal. And it's not the first time. I mean, Putin has always sort of in the countries surrounding Chechnya, other countries surrounding Russia, been very, very aggressive. So I'm not sure I agree with Dee's characterization that the president has it out for Putin. Putin is a rogue actor, and it's not just the president's concern. It's ultimately very much Europeans' concern about how this guy gets brought back into some semblance of a normal relationship with his neighbors.
Reuters reporting this morning Ukraine to impose sanctions on Russian individuals and firms. Steve in Nocona, Texas, Republican caller. You're on the air with Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut.
Good morning.
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 Well, I'm a proud American. I love this country, and I've prayed for this country for years and years, and I've always asked them. And I just believe that there's absolutely zero fear of God in the Democratic Party, in that they've endorsed all these different things that abhor to God. And I am an American Indian, a Cherokee, and our president has wanted to enable the races through racism. They want to say that we have been
that it's racist to be like a Redskin fan. Well, we adapted to the white man, the Cherokee did.
Steve, can I ask you to get to your point, your question for the congressman?
Yeah. Well, I just feel that there is a reason for all the upheaval in the world, and and be of good cheer that we win in the end. And it's square pegs fitting in round holes. They just don't fit. This administration has gotten off centered.
Okay. All right. Congressman, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we disagree over a lot of things, and it often, comes up in these conversations, and we should. The strength of our system, of course, is that we don't agree on a lot of things, and we come together in that, big white dome building just up the street here and have those debates, and we should, and that's a strength. But one thing I hope we don't do is, Steve started his statement by saying he loves his country. I think that's true of everybody who's here. We all love our country, and I think we all try, whatever God we worship, to do right by that God's ideals. I'm reminded of something Lincoln said. I forget the context. It was, I think, during the Civil War when Lincoln said, we should never pray that God would be on our side. We should pray that we would be on God's side. And that's probably a little better way to think of it than trying to determine whether the Republicans or Democrats are more consistent with God's will.
You are the National Finance Chair for the DCCC. Here is a headline in the Washington Times this morning. Obama raises funds while international crisis looms. His trip drawing criticism, headed to the West Coast yesterday for 3 fundraisers. Some of that money going to the DCCC for the midterm elections. Should he be doing this? Is it appropriate?
Well, is the whole system a good system that relies on huge amounts of money to influence our elections? Absolutely not. I've been a staunch opponent of the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United, the Supreme Court's decision in the McCutcheon case, which is bringing huge amounts of money into our political system, millions of dollars into Senate races and House races. That's a bad system. That said, it's the system that we've had for a long time, though it has gotten worse. And, again, this is another one of these things like, oh, well, Obama's doing this, Obama's playing golf. During the Iraq War, when we were actually at war, the president at the time, George W. Bush, raised money for his party, and, this has been true for a very long time.
How much money has the president raised for the DCCC?
I don't know the actual number that the president has raised for the DCCC. The DCCC gets its funding from Democratic members of Congress. It gets its funding from huge numbers of grassroots supporters all over the country. But the president, obviously, when he holds a fundraising event, attracts a lot of attention and helps too.
We'll go to Jan in California, Republican. Hi, Jan.
Good morning. I agree with one thing and I disagree with the other. My disagreement with you is on Benghazi, because I believe the president should not have been at one of these campaign raising funds with these movie stars and hundreds of bottles of champagne on the night after our boys were murdered, and for 8 hours waited for help from the United States military. And knowing, I listened to the hearings, and during those hearings it was brought out that there was a neighbor, they data, and that's why our people in Libya asked for help in Benghazi, because they wanted guns on top of their buildings, and because of the appearance, they didn't get it from Obama.
Congressman, can you address those those items she just laid out?
Well, it sounds like Jan was saying that that people on the ground made a call for help that was, and I hear this is another one of the many sort of conspiracy theories that somebody, maybe the president, maybe a senior military officer, said, no, we're not going to help. That's just flat out wrong. Just plain flat out wrong. And look, we've had 7 or 8 investigations, some within the Congress, some the Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullen led an investigation that completely refuted these many conspiracy theories that are out there. Now let's be very clear here. No, there wasn't a call for help that went out. If people take the time to learn what was going on, our military assets in the area were far away. In some cases, Italy, Northern Africa, in ways that would have made it impossible for them to get there for an event that was happening in a 1 hour, 2 hour time frame. But let's not forget that this was a tragedy, and we can learn from it. Those who continue to try to suggest that it was the president's fault, that's going to stop us from learning what we should learn from, which is that in very dangerous areas, we need to adequately secure both our facilities and our ambassador, and it's up to Congress in both parties to adequately fund State Department security and other security to keep our people safe.
Coventry, Connecticut. Jim, Democratic caller.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Coventry, Connecticut.
Yes, under Mr. Courtney. My question, I have three quick statements. Everybody keeps invoking how big, tough Ronnie Reagan was, who I voted for twice, and I vote for again, because he did right for the country, period. And Benghazi, Ronald Reagan got 250 Marines and sailors killed in Beirut, Lebanon, by Hamas. How's Hamas doing today? Look at the big picture. Every president makes mistakes. And to squawk about Benghazi, which is a tragedy, and it happens, and look at the history. The ignorance of the history of America is unbelievable, okay? They were, the Republicans were in charge. From the second you take the oath of office, your number one job is to protect the people of the United States of America. And you allowed the largest attack on American soil in my lifetime. I'm 54 years old. And you got some nerve to squawk about Benghazi, which was a tragedy.
Okay, Jim, I'll leave it there. We're going to Steve in Littleton, Massachusetts, an independent caller. Steve, welcome to the conversation.
Well, thank you. And I had to sigh when I heard the congressman, talking about Putin having not contributed to anything really to culture, the arts, and the extension. I heard something there. I'm not sure what it was. But at any rate, not contributing to the arts and entertainment. The United States, what have we been doing? We've been promoting and exporting pornography and ghoulish violence, demeaning our young people, demeaning families and women, promoting utter decadence. And in the name of women's rights, what have we been doing? We've been demeaning women. Look at Miley Cyrus, or whatever her name is. Miley Cyrus, and, the Democrats seem to be promoting this.
How is that, Steve? How is that?
Well, to the extent that there's no objection to it, and the congressman here is holding American exceptionalism up as though we are, the virtuous beacons of liberty.
Okay.
Okay, I don't think I commented on Putin and arts and entertainment. I've never really thought about that. One of the sad things, and I guess what I would say to Steve is, you think back on Russian history. Russia has massively contributed actually to culture and music. Tchaikovsky, Chekhov, just remarkable. Stravinsky. And the same is true of the United States. Jazz was developed in this country. Aaron Copland, the blues, you name it. Huge contributions. Is there lowbrow stuff? Of course there's lowbrow stuff. Probably the lowbrow stuff in Russia is bad or worse as it is here. It's not, it's maybe up to us as fathers and community leaders to say we like this stuff, we don't like this other stuff. It's certainly not up to the government to say that. The First Amendment to the Constitution says that guys like me, elected officials, the government, don't get to tell the people of the United States what they get to listen to and watch, which I think at the end of the day is a good thing, but yes, it means that there's some stuff out there that some people will consider real garbage.
Jimmy, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Republican caller.
Hey, my thing is, from what I've seen, it looks like the morals of the United States have seemed to start depleting a little bit. And one of the things that I would like to know is, you keep protecting the president on the things like Benghazi, things that he does oversee. There are oversight committees for this. And what I want to know is why everyone always comes back and says the president is the one that got bin Laden. Our special forces got bin Laden. They train to do things like this. The only thing our president does is says go. I want to see our military strong. We need to finish in Iraq instead of stopping like we did in Vietnam. And our whole government back to a moral standard to where everybody is equal. How do you feel about that?
Well, Jimmy, I appreciate you pointing that out. You're absolutely right. It was some incredible men and women in our military and CIA and intelligence community. It was actually a lot of people who helped get bin Laden. Nobody has any doubt about that. The president also, as you point out, he says yes or no. He said yes. And that, by the way, is a massively consequential decision for his presidency. He didn't have 100% proof that bin Laden was in that building. If that building had not had bin Laden in it, or if we'd lost 4, let's just use the same number as we're at Benghazi, that guy's presidency would have been very much in jeopardy. Look what happened to Jimmy Carter when he gave the go-ahead for the hostage rescue mission in Iran. That forever crippled his presidency. So you're absolutely right, Jimmy. It was our young men and women in uniform who actually did the work on the ground in Abbottabad that night, but this president put it all on the line to accomplish something that had not been accomplished for years prior in terms of getting and bringing to justice the man who led the most horrible terrorist attack on U.S. soil in our history.
On the domestic side, 2 lower courts yesterday had conflicting rulings on the Affordable Care Act. The D.C. appeals court saying that subsidies should not be going for the federal exchange. Here is the Washington Times editorial board. Obamacare is now in intensive care, is what they think. And the Wall Street Journal editorial board saying this, that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals held that the administration violated the Affordable Care Act by expanding subsidies to the 36 insurance exchanges run by the federal government. The plain statutory language of Obamacare repeatedly stipulates that these credits shall flow only through an exchange established by the state. Your take.
Well, yeah, so you know, you've read from 2 very conservative newspapers, the 2 judges in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and it was 2 of 3 judges who voted the way the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Times would want them to vote. Republican appointees, and guess what? The one judge who opposed those 2 judges was a Democratic appointee. So we have politics at work here more than legal issues. There's 2 ways to think about this. On the legal side, the language is ambiguous. You know, they talk about state exchanges. When language is ambiguous, and this has been true for 240 years in this country, courts say, okay, it's not clear what the language says. What was congressional intent? There is absolutely no doubt, and I was there, that the congressional intent was to provide subsidies for all Americans, not just to Americans in states that decided to start these exchanges. So I think that and remember, as you pointed out, 2 courts went in opposite directions on this. In the D.C. Circuit, this is now going to be heard by all 11 judges within that D.C. Circuit. I think eventually what they're going to do is they're going to say, look, what did Congress intend? And there is absolutely no doubt about what Congress intended. Step back for a second from the legality of this, though, because we're in this ongoing fight where an awful lot of people just, you know, want to do away with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act in its entirety. Step back away from the legalities and say, as I have always said, I voted for the Affordable Care Act, and I have always said that there's things in it that don't work, that we should fix. At this point, those who delight in the possibility of the failure of Obamacare, let's just imagine that, I don't think this is going to happen, but that this court is upheld, that this decision is upheld. That will mean that millions of Americans in 36 states now no longer have health insurance. They no longer have access to hospitals and doctors. They can't take their kids to doctors if they can't afford it. Is that something to celebrate? Is that something we want for the American people? You know, governors in this country in those 36 states said we're not building in many of those states said we're not expanding Medicaid. Medicaid is the program that provides health care for poor people. Poor people in this country are sick and dying because of the political decisions taken by those governors. Why did those governors decide that? Let's give them the best. Let's assume the best of their arguments. To afford it. Really? The greatest, most powerful, richest nation in the world that can fight wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, we can't afford to keep poor people from dying by expanding Medicaid? I just, you know, let's hash this out in court, but let's remember what it is that we're talking about. We're talking about whether we want to support the most vulnerable people in our country.
By the way, the New York Times editorial board called the D.C. Circuit Court's decision an ominous health care ruling, and the Washington Post editorial board also weighing in, saying the court's contradictions to federal appeals court's rule on Obamacare, and the Washington Post saying the Virginia court got it right in favor of the health care law. Pat, Baytown, Texas, Democratic caller. Hi, Pat. Morning, Pat. You're on the air with Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut. Oh,
might have lost him.
That's not supposed to happen. We'll go to Tony in Chapel Hill, Tennessee, independent caller. Hi, Tony.
Good morning. Glad to talk to y'all. I've been watching C-SPAN for a long time. Greta, don't cut me off, because you're bad about cutting people off when you don't want to hear what they have to say. I have a statement and a question. My statement is, people, this is the very reason we need to get rid of the incumbents. This man right here and all of them just like him. And it's not just him. It's Republicans alike. I haven't elected, I don't think, but 2 people to my Congress or Senate because I vote for the independents. And, of course, they lose, and everybody says, well, you lose, you vote. Don't be stupid. Vote for the independents. And my question is, when in the devil are we going to stop blindly following Israel? Israel killed a 16-year-old with a bulldozer. Come on, people.
Well, Tony, I appreciate your comment. The good news is that in just about 100 days, the American people will have an opportunity to throw the bums out if they want to do that. Every single one of my 434 colleagues is up for re-election in November, and the beauty of our system, and it's not a system that exists in or China or Iran, a lot of places around the globe, is that you'll have your opportunity to weigh in on who represents you here in Washington in just about 3 months. So that's a good thing, and obviously I know how I hope my constituents will vote, but most importantly, I just hope that everybody out there will make their voices heard and exercise their right to vote on Election Day.
Before Congress adjourns here in August, and then again before the November elections, it sounds like border security, the southern border in particular, needs to be addressed funding-wise, that there needs to be some emergency funding passed. The stories this morning that there's 2 dueling bills. The Senate's going to have a bill that's $2 billion less, or $1 billion less than the president wants, and the House is going to have a bill that's about a little less than $2 billion.
Yeah, and this is Greta, like so many of the issues we're facing, a really challenging issue. It's not a situation that we necessarily want to find ourselves in. The way I think about this is, a lot of our callers this morning have sort of talked about being morally right and being right with God. Let's start there. Let's step back and consider that this is not a partisan issue. This is not a U.S. versus Mexico issue. This is a humanitarian crisis. I mean, it's almost biblical in the sense that we have children, innocents, showing up on our border. And how we deal with that, I think 20 years from now, this is a moral test. It's almost a biblical moral test, and people say, well, it's, I saw a sign in Murrieta, California, not our children, not our problem. Again, back to the Bible, those who God has favored have not always wanted to assume the burden that God has placed on them. Abraham, Moses, you name it. But how they assume that burden really defines who they are. So we start with I think the premise that we've got to do right by these children and not quickly send them back into harm's way into El Salvador or Guatemala where they may be killed. And doing that right, the word, of course, in legal circles is due process. What that really means is, case by case, we're going to have to take these children and make sure that we are not, the law requires us to eventually send them home, but we need to do that in a way to make sure that we are not sending them to a neighborhood or to a community where they will be killed. And that's going to require, to your question, is going to require some funds, and it is up to Congress to make those funds available.
Washington Times front page this morning with the headline that the House GOP wants the National Guard on the border to halt the influx of these young illegals. House Republicans will call Wednesday for decisive action to end the border crisis, proposing a deployment of the National Guard troops and accelerated deportation hearings for unaccompanied children.
Well, so there's no question, and I agree 100% that our borders must be secure, and we've got some work to do in that regard. I don't think a lot of people disagree with that. But I'm not sure that fully answers the question. So, and by the way, there's a lot that we haven't talked about that we need to do. We need to be working with countries like Guatemala and El Salvador to make it very clear to people there that you can't show up on our borders and expect to be made a citizen or, stanching these rumors. But so let's imagine we have a perfectly secure border, and we have Americans staring across a fence at 20 children who are dying of exposure and thirst or whatever, because this is, of course, a very rough area. What then? What do we do? Do we just say this is not our problem? We're just going to watch those children die? So I'm all in favor of a totally secure border, and if we need to do a lot more work, as I do, that's fine. But let's not kid ourselves that alleviates this almost biblical moral obligation that has been put upon our shoulders to make sure that some very vulnerable and innocent people are taken care of.
Front page of the Houston Chronicle, courtesy of the museum, says the National Guard can't stop the border crossers. They don't have the authority to arrest them, but the advocates of putting the guard there is that it sends a political message.
Great, right? So that's what we're going to do in a humanitarian crisis: send political messages. Again, let's focus on what we need to do here, which is deal with the humanitarian in a way that will make us, as moral beings, feel good about how we did that.
We'll go to Jeff in Columbia, Missouri, Republican caller. Morning, Jeff.
Good morning. I watch your show all the time. It's great. Hey, I was wondering, when are you guys going to start doing something about the domestic terrorism through the internet with hurricanes, invasions of privacy, tornadoes, ice storms, mind control?
Well, Jeff, what are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about things that have been going on for the last 5 administrations with the internet.
All right, we'll go on to, let me go on to Doug in Niles, Michigan, Democratic caller. Doug, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Himes.
Hi, Doug.
Hey, I think it's priceless. A little less Fox and a lot more C-SPAN. I need to put that on the license plate. Hey, but I just want to say this morning, how is it that so many Americans can profess not only domestic affairs, but foreign policy as well? I don't get this. They must be in all the meetings that you're in the mornings. I just wanted to say that this morning, and get it.
Thanks, Doug. I'm not sure I caught the question, but I appreciate the comment.
This morning, the Finance Services, the Finance Committee, which you're a member of, Financial Services, is having a hearing on the Dodd-Frank legislation. Yeah. What's the hearing about? What's going on with this law?
So I think this will be a really interesting hearing. As you point out, there's a panel to talk about Dodd-Frank 4 years later. We're at the four-year anniversary of the passage of Dodd-Frank. Actually, Barney Frank, who was chairman and whose name is on that bill, will be there. So I think it'll be really interesting, and I hope a good discussion. Like so many other things that we've talked about this morning, Dodd-Frank has done some very, very good things. These toxic mortgages that were sold to people, where the person who sold that mortgage knew that the family had no choice of ever repaying it. That's a thing of the past. Derivatives, which were a big and kind of, they're a massive market, are now regulated. That's a good thing. But of course, no law is perfect, and there are criticisms of Dodd-Frank, and hopefully those get outed today. It's a good opportunity. Now, hopefully it's not all about the politics. Hopefully it's actually about the substance, where we can reflect on what's gone right and what's gone wrong in that law, and how do we need to adjust it. Because Wall Street, of course, those are the words you use when you want to scare people, and appropriately so, because Wall Street went pretty well out of control in 2008. But we need to remember that the balance is important, because, yes, on the one hand, we need to make sure that the catastrophe of 2008 never happens again. All that irresponsibility, that malfeasance never happens again. On the other hand, banks are what allow us to borrow to send our kids to school, to borrow to buy a home, to borrow to start a small business, and we need to make sure that that stays vibrant.
We will be covering that hearing, by the way, so at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. If you're interested, go to cspan.org. You can watch it there. We'll hear from Judy. She's our last here for the congressman in Shelbyville, Tennessee, Republican caller.
Hello. How are you?
Hi, Judy.
Hey, I have a couple of things. First of all, I am disappointed that presidents I feel like I don't have a president of the United States, that he is strictly for a Democrat. And I don't believe in all that Democrats do are bad. I don't believe that the Republicans are always right. But I think that when a president's out campaigning hard, using our taxpayer dollars from millions of dollars to be flown here or there to campaign, I think it's wrong, regardless to what president it is. Also, Bonnie, for the housing market, interest rates are so low that we as elderly, and we're elderly, can no longer earn money on our CDs. We're down to what? Not even % for the ones of us that cannot afford to be in the stock market to take the chances of it up and down.
All right, Judy, I'm going to leave it there and have the congressman respond. We're running out of time. Go ahead.
Yeah, Judy's absolutely right about the interest rate things. And for our senior citizens and others who rely on bonds and savings accounts for that income, one of the real tragedies of low interest rates, and of course we have low interest rates today because that's supposed to help the economy recover, but there's a terrible cost that is borne by people like Judy who rely on interest. And Judy, the only thing I would say about, I also agree with your other statement, and this takes us back to the conversation about how we elect people in this country. I hope that at some point we get to a point where we all agree that no president, that no member of Congress, no senator should spend most of his or her time raising money. One thing you should know, Judy, though, is that whenever a Republican or a Democratic president is flying around the country doing fundraisers, and I'm not saying these fundraisers are good, I look forward to a day when they don't have to do that, but when they do that, Republican or Democrat, the parties reimburse the military and others for the cost of actually moving the president around if it's political.
Real quickly, you have some housing legislation where does it stand? What would it do?
So Representative Delaney and Carney of Maryland and Delaware and I have just proposed a reform of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that basically would have the government there as a backstop to the housing business, but would have it in a much more disciplined way than it was there in the past. In other words, you'd have the private sector participating in guarantees and bringing discipline to a market that in 2006, 2007 was very, very undisciplined. So that's the idea behind this legislation. It's kind of one of the great undone things from 2008, the reform of these entities, and we're hoping that maybe we can get good bipartisan support for the idea.
You can learn more if you go to the Congressman's website, himes.house.gov. We want to thank you very much for talking to our viewers.
Thanks, Greta.
Coming up next, we're going to talk with Kansas Republican Tim Huelskamp, a member of the